My name is Margaret Larson, and I host a show called New Day Northwest on King 5, but more importantly, I am privileged to have as a friend Robert Taylor. And so I've been asked tonight to help us facilitate this event, and I am so glad that you're here. I know everybody is here because of his book, A New Way to Be Human, and also to celebrate community, so it's good to see everyone. We are going to be hearing from some true luminaries tonight, and of course, in just a bit, Robert will read part of his book, and he'll also be answering questions. Robert has been, as I suspect he has been to many of you, an inspiration to me. He has been an invitation in everything that he has done to be a calm and thoughtful and more spiritual person. He is somebody who has helped me grow, and I am very grateful for him. I am very, very proud to be here for him tonight. We are also grateful for Paula Clapp, the host of the evening, former Mayor Norm Rice, the co-host, and our host committee, as well as Tomball. Let's give them a round of applause for their wonderful music. And, of course, Elliott Bay Books. And again, we'll be hearing from Robert shortly, but right now I'd like to introduce you to two very special people. Paula Clapp is one of Seattle's leading global philanthropists and a true light in our community. Among many other roles, she's a wonderful mom and a grandma, a wife, and co-founder of both Global Partnerships and the Seattle International Foundation. Former Seattle Mayor Norm Rice is the president and CEO of the Seattle Foundation, and that is, of course, one of the nation's biggest community foundations, and a winner of so many community and professional awards that I couldn't even list them out. But he is a champion of what is right all the time, and that means he will always be the mayor. So we thought it would be enlightening to hear about how Robert and his new work, from their point of view, has affected their lives, what they think about the book, and listen to their conversation. So please help me welcome Paula Clapp and Norm Rice.
Hi. Hey, Margaret. Thank you, honey. Okay.
Thank you, love.
Good evening. Hi, everybody. It's so nice to see you here.
Good evening.
My friend, the mayor.
No kidding. This is an honor and a pleasure to be here tonight and to recognize and be a part of Robert Taylor's life and life's journey. I was just wondering, Paula, you've known Robert for how long?
About 5 years.
5 years?
Yeah, we met at St. Mark's Cathedral, and I had met Judy Mayotte, who is a good friend of Robert and Jerry's, and I told her I was looking for an Episcopal church, and then synchronicity happened, and I met Robert shortly after that and served with him on the vestry for a little while, and then Robert's partner Jerry and I and you, many people said, Robert, you got to write a book. So people had been telling him that for years because he's had such a fascinating life in South Africa, working against apartheid, and befriended Desmond Tutu, who actually helped him get out of the country. So Robert listened to us, and he wrote a book.
He sure did.
So that was very special, and it's been in the works for probably 3 years, and I've been envisioning the book, having it sold, and having a big blowout party here tonight. So I am so grateful to all of you for attending. It's a dream come true for many of us.
I don't want to step on Robert's line, but I guess I've known Robert almost at the very time that I became mayor of the city of Seattle. I really believe that, in a funny sort of way, there's a movable feast that's going on here in this book. And he talks a lot about the feasting and what it is for the soul and all. But there's a journey that you can take in every chapter, and there's a lesson to be learned. And I think that the spirituality and the sense of Robert Taylor as a Seattle icon, we worked a lot on the Committee to End Homelessness, Tent City, looking at equity issues all across this city. And Robert was always a stalwart, always a champion, always there to give voice and spiritual guidance to all of us who believed in people's opportunities to be the best that they could be.
Yeah, he's remarkable.
It is, no doubt about it. Applause, please. No.
Just, the audience needs to know you got two kind of pushy Robert Taylor, Jerry Smith groupies here. We're just thrilled to be here.
No doubt about it. I remember once having the opportunity to speak at St. Mark's very slowly, as they always tell you, because
Yes, the acoustics.
the acoustics will kill you in the whole process. But I always said that what he created, and I always have that image in mind, is a citadel on the hill. St. Mark's was a place that was a beacon about equality and justice for all. And it's a part of my DNA and a part of being a friend of his. We also have another connection. He was very instrumental with my wife, Constance Rice, when she built schools for young African women in
right.
Swaziland, and then working on South Africa issues. And I think she was the first director of the Desmond Tutu Peace Foundation.
She was.
Which was
I remember
located
that.
here.
Yeah.
And then Robert's stories, which are
You'll all get a
through
chance
here,
to read.
are wonderful stories. Every chapter is an adventure, a lesson, and an inspiration.
Yeah, and that's what Robert talks about early on in the book. For those who you haven't read it, and I'm not going to spoil the ending for you, but it's just the essence of being who we are and having the faith and courage to share our stories about who we are. It's not what have you done or what are you doing, it's
Exactly.
who are you. And that can be a very sacred place to share your heart with another person and get to know yourself better as well. It's about risk and trust.
No doubt about it. There's a journey here. And in that journey, in each chapter, as it's laid out, there's not only the story of the journey, but the lessons, and then the challenge to you to look at yourself, within yourself, because in some ways, Robert's introspection is as great as his outward lessons that you
Exactly.
need to have. And those are lessons that all of us could really learn from in our ability to think about ourselves and who we love and what we care about.
And I think people will, if you're on a spiritual journey or not, I think picking up the book, you can be at any point in your journey and get something so valuable and nourishing from the book. I always feel better and more at peace when I read Robert's book. And also what's so wonderful is he has questions at the end of each chapter. And so you have a chance to really, if you choose, take time and think about what he's asking or what he's highlighted in the chapter. And one of my friends said, oh, this is great. We can use it for our book club because it's already got the questions in the back. So it's a one-stop shop.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
So-
And I think that's the best part is this will be a book that you will find as a friend that you can pick up anytime and find something new and something inspiration for you to keep inspirational to be thinking about. That's what I like about a good book. My mother taught me a good book is your best friend, and you should keep it handy so that you can always be reminded of what friendship and love and faith really mean. And I think that's sometimes what a lot of us forget about. I want to applaud you, too, for just how much you worked on making this journey also a success yourself, because
Thanks,
you
Norm.
are one true spirit and champion, and it means a lot to all of us.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. Well, Norman, thank you for that. It's a dream come true for many of us, as you as well, because Robert has so many friends in Seattle, around the state, who are just so thrilled for him and his success. And this is his official launch in the Northwest, and then he's going on to California and the East Coast and Chicago in the next few weeks. So we're so happy that he's here. And I say, let's get Robert Taylor out to read from his book.
I agree.
What do you think, Norm?
I think we're ready.
Okay.
Okay.
All right.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you, too. Good job. See you in a minute. Thank you very much, Norm. Thank you. Oh, have I caught your record? Thank you. Thank you so much. Well, no one is quite like Robert Taylor in my experience. He began his life, obviously, in the ethical turmoil of apartheid in South Africa and in the physical turmoil of some real physical challenges, problems with his back that kept him encased literally in a body cast more than once. He's known the pain and the isolation of leaving one's country, the dangers of fighting a system as mighty as apartheid, and the complications of life within the church, but always with the joys of knowing faith and inviting others to redemption and healing through God, however you understand that. His book, A New Way to Be Human, is an invitation, as Norman Paula said, to better understanding ourselves, each other, the human condition, and what's holy. And in it, I think, is Robert's answer to what he sees as the spiritual yearning in all of us. Not answers that he provides, but pathways that he gives us for us to travel. Please welcome my friend, spiritual thinker and author, Robert Taylor.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. Love you too. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Wow. Good evening. I think we need to try that again. Good evening. Oh, much better. What a wonderful night. Thank you for being here to launch A New Way to Be Human. Thank you, Margaret, for being our amazing MC this evening and for your years of friendship and for being one of the earliest endorsers of the book. And thank you, Paula Clapp, our host tonight, for being the godmother of the book, through all of your encouragement and belief in it and your luminous spirit and friendship. And thank you, Norm Rice, for being co-host with Paula. Within days of my arrival in Seattle, I was invited by Norm to meet with him to get acquainted, and it is a friendship that I have cherished over the years and so well remember spending some of my first Christmases in Seattle with you and Constance at your home. And then my literary agent, Gordon Warnock, is somewhere here. Oh, there he is. Oh, he's just coming up the stairs right on cue. Gordon has believed in this project and nurtured it along and has flown in from California, so thank you, Gordon. It is wonderful to have so many of my family here tonight, which I am deeply grateful for. And most especially to my spouse, Jerry, who radiates light and joy, and who has been there along every step of the way. Thank you for you, and for being the love of my life. Thank you. And a final thank you to the people who you will meet in the book, for their stories, for their lives of inspiration, and for the way in which they illuminate truth so greatly. So you may be thinking, why do we need a new way to be human? Jadedness describes how countless numbers of people feel about life and what is happening in the world. And along with jadedness comes disengagement, often a sense of helplessness, and perhaps even powerlessness. We experience a fracturing in the human family when politicians or religious leaders cast those with opposing views as quote-unquote evil. It's very hard to have a conversation with someone who you have just relegated to that realm. Or when religious leaders like Pat Robertson a few weeks ago described non-Christians as a virus to be stamped out. And you wonder where the spirituality of interconnectedness, of oneness, and love find a home. But it doesn't have to be so. And you know that probably in the story of your own life. I've written A New Way to Be Human because I believe that we are each invited into a life of being fully alive, that our lives are at stake when we embrace a choice about a new consciousness. So what if you quit accepting life as it is and stop settling for so little? What if the world really can change? And what if that change really does begin with you? The book is described on the website of the Los Angeles County Museum of Art, where Archbishop Tutu will join me on May the 16th for the LA launch, as a book about how to be happy and change the world. And at first I was a little surprised by that, because it conjured up all sorts of images, and I wasn't sure that I liked it. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized that whoever had read the book was actually on to something. The book is about how to be happy. Not the sort of happiness that you're promised that will happen if you buy a Prius or a Mini Cooper or a new Toyota pickup or whatever the case might be. But the happiness that emerges when you pay attention to your well-being. Because when you ground your life in your well-being, you can't help but yearn for the well-being of others, both in your immediate circle and in the human family, and probably creation itself. And so the book is about how to live an integrated life in which you experience that kind of happiness and help to polish the world. A New Way to Be Human is an invitation to experience a transformed way of living in every facet of your magnificence. The story of James and Dwight offers a taste of that invitation. It comes from the Seventh Pathway and a section entitled, If Only. Life invites you to live more fully in the present. Yet each time you say, if only, you draw a boundary around your life and enclose yourself from the yearnings of your heart. With each utterance of those words, you distance yourself from the expectation and experience of delight. It becomes a way of living in a shroud of regret. Each time I am in a restaurant with James, he instinctively follows the same script. After ordering his meal, he turns to look at the food being delivered to neighboring tables and says, "I should have ordered that." As we engage in conversation, his eyes are always focused on the plates in front of each person around the table. Without fail, he compares his meal to what the rest of our group has ordered and says, "You know, I could have ordered that." It is a metaphor for how James lives his life. James is an excellent social worker who is passionate about his work. The emerging truths of his life involve discovering and trusting his own voice and celebrating it. But he says, you ask a social worker like me to help, and I'm right there. I'm good at it, but I'm not as good at respecting myself or allowing joy and delight to be real for me. I want those things for others. His self-image of unworthiness is compounded by the aching human needs of others that he responds to each day in his work. The barriers to living in the present are represented in James's language of regret. If only, could have, and should have. Awake to this pattern, James now practices new daily choices that begin with naming his awareness of living behind a fence when he uses such language. His day includes short meditation moments, including the phrase possible. His choice is to be open to the journey of delight discovered in the present. There is a stark contrast between him and my friend Dwight. In restaurants, he frequently puts down the menu and says to the waiter, "Why don't you surprise me with what you think the best item on the menu is?" I've never heard him express disappointment about the meal that is delivered to the table. His surprise me is a metaphor for his life and the choice he makes to be open to the delight and surprises of the present. On your journey to becoming fully alive, your past shapes the images and narrative that you tell about yourself, creating a course for the journey ahead. Only you can change the direction of your journey. Your well-being and delight is essential to the world and yourself. Becoming free of your if-onlys changes the landscape of your life, allowing you to replace a confining life of regret with a life full of delight in the present. Connecting stories is one of the 7 spiritual pathways for a new way to be human. And I'd like to read to you something from the beginning of that first story. Desmond Tutu's eyes twinkled as he leaned in with a simple yet profound question. "Tell me about your life, Robert. Not what you've done, but who you are." It was our first one-on-one meeting. At the time, I was 22 years old. He was 49. I was a white South African young adult trying to figure out who I was. He was a black anti-apartheid activist and priest considered public enemy number 1 by the South African government at the time. I had been involved in anti-apartheid work for just a few years and felt privileged to be in his presence. What could we possibly have in common? I reflected for a moment. The best starting place for expressing who I was began with relating the transformative pain that shaped so much of my journey. So I shared a story of my time in the hospital as a teenager. Little did I realize at the time the holy invitation Tutu was making, or the common ground that we shared. I began to tell Tutu that day, a little bewildered by his question of waking up in the middle of the night and having fallen out of my hospital bed and was terrified that I had damaged the spine that had been operated on just a few weeks prior. I was crying. A nurse came to me, and after discovering that I was going to be okay, she came back with mugs of hot chocolate, and she held my hand. And as we sat for an hour, I told her that I was lonely. Visiting hours were limited to 30 minutes a day. Not much time. I told her that I'd been doing a lot of reading, and I told her in particular about a book by a man by the name of Trevor Huddleston, who wrote about a vibrant, multicultural, multiracial community in South Africa that was raised from the face of the earth because it didn't fit with the grand scheme of apartheid separating people from one another. And as she got ready to go back to the nurse's station and to do her work in the middle of the night, she paused and turned to me and said, "Robert, you've had a very good visitor in Mr. Huddleston." As I paused in the telling of my story, Desmond Tutu's laughter filled the room, bringing me back to the present. Incredulous, I looked at him, just waiting for him to settle down. Finally, Tutu said, "When I was a young boy, I had tuberculosis. I spent months in the hospital just like you, every day. I was lonely and afraid. Trevor Huddleston was my priest. He visited me almost every day, reading stories and talking to me. Huddleston inspired me to do what I do. Shared transformation decades apart. We are each the author of our own story. Tutu's self-awareness of how his story continually shaped who he is infused him with a curiosity and desire to know who I was as an individual versus what I had done. His invitation to tell my story catalyzed for me a lifelong journey of discovering and rediscovering that our stories matter. If I had not chosen to tell him what shaped me in that particular story, we may never have discovered the unexpected intersection of life that transformed us both. With his invitation, he honored me as much as he honored the holy interwoven into my life. This book is my way of extending the same invitation to you. When you know your own story, with all of its wonder and shame and regret and joy, and when you can be compassionate about it in yourself, something transformative happens. Secure in who you are, you can begin to stop clutching at life and live each day with unclenched hands and an open heart and spirit. Your resulting appreciation of your belovedness and your delight in life is not a personal treasure for you or for me alone, but a gift in transforming the world. In your oneness with others, you experience a new resonance in being human. The arc of your story, of all that has made you unique, reveals spiritual truths and wisdom about your life, egging you on to discover how your story and stories connect to the stories of those whom you might least expect. And as you step beyond the enclosures of your life, you will see the hairpin curves that life throws your way as opportunities to go deeper into who you are and to experience your journey as proactive engagement with the universe, the holy, and the world. And in the process, you keep discovering and rediscovering that all of life is bundled and mixed together. And along your journey, along that journey to a new way of being human, we discover a choice about breaking through enclosures. One of the pathways is entitled Beyond Enclosures, and you may be asking yourself right now, well, what is an enclosure? So I'm going to read to you from this brief description in the book. Enclosures are self-fulfilling actions and beliefs that keep you from being who you are meant to be. When we allow ourselves to be confined by unacceptable expectations and boundaries drawn by others, such as family, culture, religion, and politics, we accept an enclosure and so define a limited us. When hiding behind your own particular enclosure, you choose to live with a cramped heart, a squelched voice, and often a lack of compassion for yourself and therefore for others. Although the choice to be enclosed can happen subtly through time, enclosure is no small thing. Your life is at stake. enclosures lock you away from the fullness of joy intended for you by the holy, and deprive the world of the gifts that only you can give, shielding you from those who most need your influence. The good news is this: because we choose our way into an enclosure, we can choose to break out. Life presents us with such invitations each day. And then I go on a few pages later to talk about some of the work that we do in discerning and paying attention to create a new awareness about how to break through our enclosures. And I begin this section by talking about a particular experience in South Africa that revealed to me some of the truths of that country. And I'll pick up with this. I found it impossible not to speak with my family about what I experienced. With the breathless discovery of a teenager, I shared my story at one family gathering, only to be greeted with, "You're treading on dangerous ground. You should be quiet." And "There's never smoke without fire. The government must know what it's doing." I was discovering that it is often those who are who are closest to us, who offer enclosure by broadcasting their bad advice. Not because they are bad people, but because when we choose a path to new truths about who we are and how to exercise our voice, they feel threatened. When we make a choice to continue to grow on the path to a new way to be human, the anxiety level of those who choose to remain in their own enclosure increases. Ironically, the more you find your own voice, the more insistent those other voices become. And this is where discernment comes in. Who do we listen to and who do we ignore? Discernment is critical because unearthing our voices and becoming who we are meant to be leads us to our heart's passions. As we make this journey, the voices of bad advice can dampen our passion as they flood in like a tsunami, shrouded in soothing tones about our welfare. Codependent urges kick in as we make apologies that they really mean well, or it's just their love for me speaking. In reality, such voices usually have little to do with us. Instead, these voices are a demand that we not upset their life or create an opening in their enclosure. Codependency does nothing to allow light to shine in our life or theirs. Your voice is to be celebrated as a reflection of your individual magnificence. Your spiritual journey is about the breath of life flowing unstopped and unstoppable through you. Without breath, you are voiceless. And without voice, you block the flow of the breath of life, bringing you fully alive. I go on to describe in the next few paragraphs an encounter that I had with a woman whose name was Martha. And I say this: in a workshop I led on the pathways to becoming enlivened, one of the participants raised her hand toward the end of the day and said to the group, "I've had an unexpected epiphany that I'd like to share." Martha said, "I've spent years engaged in contemplative, meditative practices. They've been a gift to me. But today I felt like a bird breaking out of my shell, learning to sing for the first time." The other participants leaned in, listening to someone who was clearly not used to speaking in public. Martha went on to talk about her practices, saying, "I've always listened for the voice of the holy somewhere out there, as she gestured with her arms to the space around her. I'd never imagined what I was missing is the holy in here, pointing to herself. Smiling broadly, she added, I feel as though I'm beginning to learn a new song. The notes and the lyrics have always been there, but I've never paid them any attention. You and I know that life is filled with complex nuances. And yet, I believe that when we are at home in our heart, we are surprised by love. And so I'd like to read you something from the fourth pathway of the book, which is entitled Home in Your Heart. My father stood there awkwardly, carry-on bag in hand. Clearly uncomfortable, he leaned toward me, his voice quaking with emotion. I don't know when we'll be together again. Tears filled his eyes, then mine. I love you, he said quietly. And then, amid the swirling chaos that is JFK Airport, my father kissed my cheek and tenderly held my head. I was thrown off guard by such emotion from a man who had not been raised to express demonstrative displays of feeling. It was a rare moment of emotional intimacy with my father. As I hugged and kissed him in return, I felt overwhelmed by this unexpected gift of immeasurable worth from him. I love you too, Dad, I said as I wondered if I could stop a welling avalanche of tears, of gladness and grief. I was filled with a nearly delirious gladness for what we had both just experienced, and expectant grief about losing future moments such as this one was accentuated by the repeated boarding call. All around us, families were bidding their farewells. The lush cadences of many languages created a human symphony of love that transformed the departure lounge into a modern-day Jerusalem on the day of Pentecost. This was all obviously pre-9/11. Against this pastiche of farewells, I reflected on our hearts as a human labyrinth of love and wondered what it meant for each of us to leave part of our heart in one place. As I move on from talking about this first visit of my parents to visit me after I had been in the U.S. for 2 years, I say this: home is a physical, emotional, intellectual, and spiritual destination. You can choose to live with segmented experiences of home, resulting in an unsettled, homeless way of life in which you are always searching for your one true home. Or you can choose the journey to a seamless experience of home by intentionally navigating the landscapes that have shaped you. In this way, your life becomes a richly textured place of hospitality and joy, no matter what your circumstances, no matter where you live. Like that kiss from my father, our lives are replete with defining moments that illuminate what is most dear in our hearts. These moments forge our experience of being at home with the many facets of who we are. They invite us to a new awareness and remind us that we are intended to live in harmony with a rich life tapestry of people and places. At home in your heart, the book suggests, I suggest, that you discover the capacity to respond to the loves and losses of your life And you know that your life has had its fair share of those, and perhaps then some. And to pay attention to your ability to choose to step beyond the shadows that lurk in your own life. I'm going to read about an experience of being surprised by love on the journey to becoming fully alive and fully human. The universe and the holy invite you beyond disillusionment into the blessing of being surprised by love. Yet it is easy to be trapped in the widely held paradigm that love is about making nice. This setup for failure and discontentment and anger keeps you fenced off from transformative, life-giving love. When you instead choose to be part of the universe's ecosystem of love, your consciousness is given an opportunity to shift. One night after a meeting, I sat on the edge of the bathtub, sobbing. For almost 2 years, a handful of people had tried everything they could imagine to make me leave my job. All attempts to reconcile with this small group went unreciprocated. That night, I had been relentlessly charged with being too charismatic a leader, too skilled at fundraising, and too powerful. The temptation in such circumstances is to judge those who have ripped open their own inconsistencies and to wallow in the reality of pain, loss, or desire for revenge. I knew that unless I worked through those truths, they would become the defining container that incarcerated me. My disillusionment became a blessing rather than a scarring curse when I discovered that my physical reactions and truth-telling pointed to an invitation. The sobs that contoured their way throughout my body cleansed and awakened me. It was a defining moment. Suddenly I understood that the charges were not about the qualities of my leadership. I realized instead that my desire to reconcile had turned into an extended dark night of the soul. My health and place in the ecosystem of the universe needed to be set free by relinquishing my cherished belief in the possibility of reconciliation. I was surprised by love. In the healing that followed that experience, my spirit practices sprung to new life. In that process, I discovered anew the practice of the Great Silence. The Great Silence is letting go of your internal conversations with yourself or the trap of incessantly reliving old stories. Instead, you look and listen to nature and life around you with a mindset of expectancy. It is a way of being present to the now. As I walked along shorelines through an orchard or an urban park, familiar landscapes beckoned me to pause as if to say, "Please, please look at me. Look and listen." As I looked, the Great Silence was filled with the sounds of birds, water lapping on a shore, or fruit dropping from a tree. The universe seemed to be saying, "Remember your oneness with us. step beyond those charges and be recharged by re-entering your place in the fragile ecosystem of creation. As I looked and listened, the thin places invited me in to be surprised by love revealed anew in the familiar. That comes from the pathway in the book that is entitled Thin Places. In the Hindu and Celtic traditions, the thin places are believed to be found in nature, most often thought of as places associated with water, but not only places associated with flowing water. The places where there is somewhat of a thin veil between ourselves and the holy or the sacred. They are regarded as significant places. And in this pathway in the book, I invite you to think about the thin places not just in those traditional terms, but to think of those places on the edges of your life. Those places that sometimes you want to step back from because they are perhaps too painful, perhaps too shameful, or perhaps you just simply can't take any more change right now, which is an okay place to be. But those are the places that I suggest as the thin places on the edge of our lives where we are invited into an invitation to go deeper and more fully into ourselves. In the seventh pathway of the book, I talk about cultivating and expecting delight for how you choose to live and ground your life. And this final excerpt that I will read tonight is the story I tell in the book about the breakfast conversation I hosted as part of Seeds of Compassion 4 years ago in Seattle. And probably some of you were there at that event when 450 people or so gathered to hear Desmond Tutu and the Dalai Lama engage in conversation about compassion. And so we're in the breakfast room at the Hyatt down the street here in Seattle. And I write this. As Tutu and I began to discuss compassion, one of the side doors to the room opened. Tutu stopped in mid-sentence and said, "Here he is," gesturing toward the Dalai Lama and beaming broadly at the sight of his old friend. On stage, they bowed to each other and hugged. You could feel the audience reciprocating their affection for one another. The discussion continued. And as I was talking, I was standing at a lectern much like this, in fact, and Tutu was in this chair and the Dalai Lama was here, and I noticed that the Dalai Lama was moving his left elbow back and forth, poking Tutu in the ribs. Not once, but repeatedly. I stopped in mid-sentence to simply watch what was going on. And finally, Tutu looked at the Dalai Lama and said, "What are you doing?" His Holiness continued poking Tutu, and he said, "You've got fat." And then, as if to add insult to injury, he said, "You've put on weight." And with that, they both collapsed into peals of laughter. It was like watching two impish school kids at play. I was mesmerized by this interaction, and the audience looked uncertain about how to respond. You could feel them holding the pause button. And then Tutu said, "You better behave yourself. Start acting like a holy man." And with that, the audience joined in the laughter. No matter the weightiness of our workload, our feelings of helplessness, or perhaps the burden that we are carrying and those two luminaries certainly know about their fair share of burdens and actions about healing and justice in the world. But no matter those things, our engagement with life is changed when we cultivate delight. Delighting in delight is not only possible each day, it is your compass for being fully alive. Using the compass of delight along your journey will reveal a different truth about your relationship with the universe and others. I hope that as you incorporate the pathways of the book into your daily life, you will awaken to the truth of the Guru and the spiritual wisdom that resides within you. It is a wisdom and an awareness that beckons you to engage with yourself and experience others through new lenses. The choice is always ours. To live with the old, cramped way of being human, or choosing a new way that brings you alive in ways that will transform, surprise, delight, and fill you with life-giving energy. I hope that through this book, you will join me on an unfolding journey to an integrated life, grounded in compassion, love, mercy, kindness, and justice. Will you let go of tinkering around the edges of your life and enter into a new consciousness of your relationship with yourself, with those you love, the holy, and the universe? The journey itself will be blessing you along each step of the way. Thank you. Thank you.
Come join me.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Robert is allowing me to ask a few questions before we open to the audience for questions. So as you contemplate what you might like to ask him, we would ask you to come forward to the microphone so that we can all hear your questions and then hear Robert's answers. Now, here's what I've learned about my friend Robert over the years. I've read a few incarnations of this book as we've gone along. We've talked about it. And I love speaking with you because I always feel better. And he's very gentle, right? You know, it's very refreshing to listen to him. There's always a motif of leaves and water. This one's a revolutionary, though. That's the real truth of it. You are inviting us to do something that we spend most of our time trying not to do. We try not to look at those broken places. We try to cover up those things that we're afraid of. And you're asking us to do something that is ultimately going to get us someplace wonderful, but that first step can be so frightening. How do we begin?
Well, you know, Margaret, I love Margaret's questions. She always floors me. I think several things. One is that grounding in your own story. As you begin to tell and retell your story, it reveals truths to you that are new each time. The story that I tell today about a particular incident will reveal new things to me when I tell that same story in 10 years. It will not be because the story has changed, but because my own willingness to be aware to the truths of the story has shifted. So I'd say that is the first thing. And then the second is courage. And I think we often think of courage as being associated with a select group of people. But the word courage, the root word for it, is about love. And so when I talk about courage, I'm saying love. Love yourself enough to trust and to be able to take a step. And for most of us, we take a baby step. We don't take these huge leaps. And so to be able to notice, to be able to name, to be able to celebrate, and to give thanks for those steps, and then also to make sure that you have some trusted people who you can share them with.
Yes. Your story is full of separations. A nation that was separated from itself, people who were separated by all manner of things. You separated from your friends and your family by your health, eventually separated from your country and your family by exile. And yet, at every step of the way, you used those separations to build new connections. And you never surrendered, so near as I can tell, not for any length of time, to resentments or fear. I'm sure you had your moments, but you built a bridge past that. How did you make that almost sound so easy, like it comes naturally for you, and maybe it's not within me. But you make me believe it is within me somehow. Yeah. Do you think it is within each of us?
I think it's absolutely within each one of us. And I think it gets to what I speak about a lot in the book, which is choices. And the kind of mindful, intentional choices that we choose to frame our life with. Now, that doesn't mean that we live into them very well every day, necessarily. But the way in which we frame the day and the choices, you can choose to wallow in something. Your sense of disconnection, your hurt, your wounds, your rejection, the way someone has treated you. You can choose to be angry, and I'm not suggesting that those are not real emotions. They're real and they're healthy. But when we live trapped by and defined by those emotions, we're cut off from the breath of life within us. And we become like them. And so the choice is to say, is that how I want to live? I find that I have iconic people in my life who I look to, who inspire me every day when I think about them. None of us does this alone. So part of what I would also say is identify who those iconic people are, and also be willing to practice detachment from those who have negative, life-draining energy. Detach, detach, detach.
We have permission.
Yes.
We have official permission, people.
And not just for the sake of detaching, but in order to embrace all that is and all who are life-giving.
It's a hard thing to do in part because it reminds us that everything is a choice. That there are certain things we have to accept, but how we deal with it, what we do about it, how we face it is always a choice. And so that's a lot of freedom that can be very frightening for people. It's frightening for me. You know, it's much easier to blame somebody else for my entrapment than to accept that there are choices that I need to make. As not me personally, as one does, look for one's story. Where do you begin as you try to identify who you are? And I love that idea because it's not about who you're married to, what you have, you know, what kind of job you do, who you are, which is equally special for all of us. How do we begin to identify who we are and tell our own story? And I suspect the book helps us, you know, through that journey. But where do we begin?
Well, you know, I was doing some book readings in Portland, Oregon over the weekend, and somebody asked a question that was somewhat similar, not as smart as your question.
Of course not. I mean, naturally not, right?
Well, of course not. And I started to give an answer, and they said, no, you're meant to say, read the book. It's in chapter whatever. So yes, read the book. What was your question again?
It's about beginning to construct our own story. I mean, you write about this as pathways, as journeys. So I suspect we're meant to read this book again and again. And as you said earlier, your story may mean something different to you later on. But just constructing your story to begin with, who am I? What questions am I asking myself to arrive at that?
Well, you know, I tell that story in the first pathway about Tutu saying to me, tell me who you are, not what you've done, for a reason. It was a very significant story to me. But in each of the stories that begin the 7 pathways, I tell a personal story by way of inviting the reader to think about the power that exists in the stories that have framed your life and that have shaped your life in ways that perhaps you haven't even thought about, and often the most seemingly simple things. And so what Tutu did that day was actually put me on the spot. Mm-hmm. I mean, if you and I were talking about it outside of, this very intimate room, I might say to you, Margaret, so why don't you actually tell me who you are? And you would probably feel a tinge of panic, as I did that day. I mean, I looked for the door. I wanted to get out of the room. And I don't know why I told him that story. I talk in the book about cultivating intuition and imagination. And I say that because I think as you start to simply tell your story, just go intuitively with the ones that come to mind. And it's helpful if you can find a way of journaling or of telling the story to others to begin to practice to do so. And it's an exercise that I often do with groups and workshops. And it is a way in which people come to some dramatic new insights about what they thought was the ordinary in their life, that in fact is much more than ordinary.
And for some of us that may be talking, and for some of us that may be writing, and for some of us that may be thinking.
Or singing.
It depends. Or singing, yeah. You're right. I mean, that is sort of a panic moment, but then I would be really excited about that because it would be real and true, and so much of what we struggle with is trying to get someplace where we can have that connection with somebody that is actually real. So I love the question, and I hope after I panicked I'd be able to answer it. I'd like to invite you forward, please, for questions. I don't want to hog my time with Robert. And feel free.
I'm going to stand.
Absolutely.
As I lurch forward, Robert, on my new left knee, first of all, I want to tell you, welcome home. We're so delighted to have you here tonight.
Thank you, thank you, thank you.
My question is this. This is an election year, a significant time in our nation, in the world. And I would like your thoughts on how we might consider the use of your pathways as we interface with the political process.
I love that question.
Are there any other simple questions tonight? Okay. Lou, I'm taking my jacket off for this one.
Here we go.
I might even roll up my sleeves in a few minutes. Thank you for the question. I think probably 4 things. I think we have to get beyond this ugly naming of others as evil or being un-American or unpatriotic or whatever the label might be. If I sit around with you, Lou, and I tell you that you're evil or unpatriotic, you're probably not really going to want to have a conversation with me, is my guess. Although being the good attorney that you are, you might relish that. So what I would suggest is don't get sucked into this name-calling as business as usual. It's unacceptable. It is not acceptable behavior. The loose use of language and labels certainly demeans our democracy, but it demeans everyone. The second is expect the dignity of difference. Strongly held views and robust arguments about them are possible when you dignify difference by honoring the validity of different beliefs. I may disagree with you vehemently about, say, I'm thinking of a blog I wrote a few weeks ago for the HuffPost about the position of certain religious leaders on birth control. I was very clear about my position, and I would argue that. But it would be okay for somebody else to have a completely opposing viewpoint. We need to elevate our discourse by dignifying difference. And the third thing I'd say is think about what it means to polish the world. I talk about that in the book a lot. Politicians are really just like us. They're good people who are flawed and complicated and messy and wonderful, and most of them probably got started in politics because they wanted to be about goodness in some way. So insist, expect that political and other leaders will tell us about how they want to polish the world and change it. And the fourth thing, which I guess goes back to what we were talking about, claim your voice in the process. Do not fall into this trap of passivity that your voice doesn't count or doesn't matter, because it does. So, next question.
Yes, ma'am.
Lou, thanks for that big picture question. And Robert, I have a very personal question to ask you about. I thought it was incredible when you named the problem of when you are trying to, I've been reading your book and moving into my authentic self, and in finding people around me who are very anxious about that, and some very close people who want to stop the process, in fact. And you talked a bit about discernment, and I think that's a very important insight. But also, how do we help bring those people along with us in our journey? If you could speak to that, it'd be very helpful. Thank you.
Yeah. Boy, this is a rough crowd. You can't force people along, as you know. In the book, I use the language of invitation a lot. And the greatest way that we invite those around us to join us is by invitation. And there will be people who choose not to accept that invitation for whatever reason. And it may be as simple as the fact that they're simply not able to go there at that moment in their life, which is okay. They may join you later on the road. For those who try to actually block you moving on your journey, as you discern this authentic you, there may be a need to detach from such people for a time, because the energy has a toxicity to it that is not helpful to you. And when you detach from someone, you do it from a place of love, and to say, I wish for the very best for you, and I hold you in my intentions, and I hope that our journeys will intersect and reconnect with new life and new power at some point, knowing that that may simply not be possible today. And as you do that, be sure to surround yourselves with those whose life energy is affirming, not in some sort of superficial way of saying, oh, isn't it nice that you're doing that, but people who understand the work that you're doing because they've done it themselves or they're doing it, and they know what it means to walk that path. Thank you for the question.
Anybody else?
Hi, Robert.
Hi.
Thank you. Thank you for everything that you said. It's resonates deep with my soul. I have a two-pronged question. The first is about, we're in a culture, in a particularly American culture, which is all about doing. What do you do? That's the first question. What do you do? Define yourself. And, I'm one of the best doers that I know, so I know how to play that game. deep in my soul, I always have this feeling, just kind of what you're saying, is that I just actually really want to know who you are, not what you do. And I found myself kind of being frustrated in conversation, and I'm just curious about your approach to what's worked for you in getting to that. And I understand the concept of that everybody's our mirror, and that if I want to create authenticity when I'm talking to someone, I get to be authentic. And I understand it starts with me, and I've felt sometimes frustrated with how to just shift that conversation. So I'm just curious, since you seem on this committed path, what has worked for you? That's half of the question, and the other half of the question is...
I'm not bright enough to remember two parts of the question.
They totally relate. They totally relate. They're totally connected. Is how would you answer that question, who are you now, differently? Like, if I asked that question to you right now, like, Robert, who are you? Like, really, who are you? That's my big questions.
Okay, thank you. Boy. Margaret, have you dealt
You're
with
not
questions
getting off
like
easy
this?
tonight. That's right.
Well, thank you. Everything after Seattle will be a breeze. Thank you for the two questions. I know that you know how to do very efficiently, and that you are OCD, as many of us in this room probably are. And that's part of just claiming the truth of who you are. There's nothing intended to be offensive about that, but celebratory about that. There are many people who don't want you to ask who they are. I mean, just think of how many people you've met this week or will meet over the course of the week and you say, hi, my name's Robert, and they say, oh, and what do you do? It's almost instinctive. They're probably not going to, in the foyer of Town Hall tonight, say to you, yeah, and who are you? But there are those who are in your workplace, in your neighborhood, in an organization that you belong to, somebody that you click with intuitively, perhaps at having dinner at a friend's house or being out on a hike with a group of friends, where those questions become real possibilities. And so I would say to be intuitively aware of those opportunities and those moments. I think so often we spend much of our life living in a state that is not about being aware. It is about simply getting through and accomplishing and doing what needs to be done. So you'll find a lot in the book about cultivating awareness and mindfulness. So I think that's probably the big answer to you. And the answer to the second part of your question is, who am I today? I would tell you that I am at the happiest and most contented moment of my life that I could ever have imagined. I give thanks for this new season in my life as much as I give thanks for every single moment that has preceded it. Every single moment. The beautiful and the ugly, the hurtful and the lavishly loving, all of it bundled together, because it's only when we start to integrate all of those experiences that we see what they reveal to us. And the truth is, even though we don't like going there, and I'm the first to admit it, is that in those moments that are the ugliest, we often learn the most, and we do our most profound work. And I see people nodding their heads to that. And yet, we stay away from it. So that is what I would say to you, and I would say that I love the work I'm doing with audiences across the country. I love the life that my spouse and I share together. I love our chocolate Labrador, Lucy, and I wish she was here to meet you. And I was going to say I love my nephew, Parker, but he's left the room. So he obviously doesn't love me as much. But he's only 10 months old. So.
Hi.
Hi.
You spoke earlier about the dark night of the soul.
Yes.
And sitting on that bath towel, experiencing the dissolution of belief, belief in reconciliation. And you spoke about entering the great silence. And how much of this latest or most recent phase of your journey has been, you spoke also about integration and the way that you've constituted yourself anew and been able to give birth to this new work. To bring that forth, how much of that required the dissolution, the dark night, the disintegration? How critical was that to what you've now been able to create and are offering? And are there lessons? Can we learn something from your journey, particularly that aspect of it, in terms of the challenges that we collectively face and confront today, what we may see, experience, or intuit as collapse? So from your own personal journey, what is there potentially for us to learn about this moment, this evolutionary moment that we are in together?
Thank you. That is a profound and wonderful question. Those moments, and I tell that story in the book because we each have those stories in our life, and you've clearly identified that. Those moments and those stories, I believe, are places of emergence. Most of us live our life, myself included, saying, this is my path. And we might start that out in our 20s or our 30s and think ahead. It seldom works out that way, but most of us function with some sense of that. But it is in those sort of shape-shifting, earth-shifting, consciousness-shifting moments that everything seems to change. In the story that I told, I think that I had had an almost idyllic belief that reconciliation was possible under any circumstance. I think I now have a belief that I like to believe it is possible under any circumstance, but acknowledge that in some circumstances it is simply not possible because it requires the engagement of several people. And so I would suggest, by way of saying that, is that whatever cherished belief is being disrupted in your place of emergence, it's probably inviting you to re-examine something that you have held on to that is important and beautiful. I'm not trying to diminish it, but it's inviting you to look at it anew. Because in those moments, you and I are being invited to look at our lives through some new lenses and a new way.
Good evening, Robert.
Hi, Doreen.
Well, for me, the question that really came up for me when you were talking earlier was when you had the experience being in the hospital, and Desmond Tutu was talking about his situation. And it took me back to when I was in the hospital for 18 months, almost 2 years. And what happened to me was joy. Even though I was a small child, joy went away. And then I rediscovered joy. So my question to you, did joy go away for you? And if it did, how did you rediscover joy? What pathway brought you there?
Yeah, thank you. Doreen and I have worked for many years on issues around homelessness in Seattle, and she is one of the luminous lights. So thank you for that. I didn't have an experience of joy going away. I had an experience of having to recalibrate my life. I write in the book about being literally in a body cast for 6 months at a time, and in high school having to have my classmates carry my books, one of whom is one of my best friends today. I talk about the sense of helplessness that came with that, of not being able to do what other kids were doing, and with a real sense of the fragility of life, and how short and temporary life could be. And I remember one night feeling very sort of sorry for myself. I just couldn't take it anymore. And I didn't want anyone to know that I was shedding any tears, because it wasn't what a boy did. And I went into my room, and my black Labrador came in with me, and she, as I was shedding tears, she gently got up onto the bed and started licking me. And it was a remarkable moment, because she knew that something was going on. And I felt enveloped by whatever it was she was communicating with me. And I thought, wow, Robert, you really can live your life as a pity trip here. And you got plenty that you could cry about. And then I started to think about Sheba lying next to me. I started to think about the generosity and the kindness of people. And so it was a moment for me of thinking about how to recalibrate how I wanted to live. So thank you for asking that. And I believe that we all have those moments.
Oh, one more question. Would you like to have a final question? We have 2 final questions tonight. The floor is yours, sir.
I only have one.
Okay.
Only
No, that's
one.
what I mean. We had a final question.
Okay.
You're going to be our next final question.
Well, my sister started part of the finishing piece that I wanted to ask you. There is the era of spirituality that you spoke about, and a new way to be human. A lot of people find the way in the midst of tragedy, in the midst of losing of life, a loss of life, or the imbalance of that life being lost. So would you take a new way to be human, listed with spirituality, for a person finding themselves stepping away from themselves and seeing themselves from the humanistic to the spiritual piece of themselves, and then look at power and vision? Now, I'm somewhere in the middle of power and vision. I tend to love to be that visionary person, and I use it, and I can tell you your future, because that's how it's coming to me. I can see it. But power has a tendency to break off a lot of things that vision wants to give. So how would you conclude all of this in saying it works together? And I know, because I've been to Africa, I have a place there, and it's a different world compared to our society.
I thank you for the question. I think that you're right, that moments of crisis invite us to new awakenings, to new truths, and that is probably the experience of most of us. We also have moments when we squander those invitations. I think that in this moment of human history, which I think is an astoundingly exciting moment to be part of, particularly when I think about the technological changes that are transforming the world in ways that we have yet to fully understand. When I think about the way in which people are claiming their voices within our own political process in some new ways, when I think about the way in which the people in places like Burma and as part of the so-called Arab Spring are essentially saying, no more to the old ways of power. And so you're probably wondering, well, why is he saying all of this about Burma and maybe new political movements in the US and the Arab Spring? Because I think they connect with this sense of disillusionment about the institutions of power. And I think that it's a disillusionment about religious power and about political power. It is about that power in almost any institution you can name, because we're figuring out some new ways to relate. And that is still, I believe, a work of emergence. And there are going to be some messy experiments with it, and there are going to be some wonderful ones. But I think we are in a moment that is as transformative as the invention of the printing press and the Industrial Revolution.
Robert, thank you.